Hello and welcome to Building Remarkable, a half-hour television show hosted by Big Sky Economic Development. I have a really special guest today, a local entrepreneur, local author, and her name is Tahani. Ooh, I almost got it. Tahani Nelson, and she's written 2 books, and we're going to talk about that, and we're also going to talk about being an entrepreneur in Billings. So welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Yes. So you are a local author, and your books, we brought 2 of them. The last Faoii and Faoii Betrayer. Those are the 2 that have been published.
Correct.
And they are fantasy novels that you wrote in the last several years. Can you tell me a little bit about your inspiration and how you decided to become an author?
Well, I've always loved fantasy. For as long as I've been alive, I've loved fantasy. But classic fantasy hasn't always been really great at representing more than one set demographic. And I was over bikini male and boob play and women that are only damsels in distress and love triangles by the time I was about 14. And I knew that if I wanted more representation, then other people probably did as well. And so I started off just writing for me, and then as I shared it with more people, it got bigger, and now I've got a really tight fan base all over the country of just people that wanted something different in fantasy, and it's been wonderful. I'm just amazed by the amount of support I've gotten.
So tell us what the process is. So you said you were writing kind of for yourself in a genre that you really loved. And then how did you decide to go and write some novels about it? I mean, that's got to be quite the process to go from your house to a book that's published and doing very well.
And I don't think any author has the same process as any other author. There's a lot of people that plan out everything and who know exactly where they want to go and know their characters before they write them and whatnot. And I am not like that. I don't know what I'm going to write until about 5 minutes after I finish writing it, and I just write what I'm thinking at any time. And sometimes I delete like entire chapters or pages, and other times I just go with the flow, and I absolutely love every minute of it. It's a different process for everybody, but I write scenes that I wish I could see, and then an entire world pops up around them, and then later an entire book.
Mm-hmm. I had just started learning about you, and so I haven't read the books yet. But can you tell us a little bit about the premise behind the book? You said was about really female empowerment and having that genre represented differently. But you also wrote your own language. And that's pretty cool.
I did write my own language. They're called the Faoii Chronicles. And I don't feel like a lot of authors create their own language for a medium that's already specifically in a language. But I love military fantasy. What I write is military fantasy, so lots of epic battle scenes, lots of really, really hardcore fights, and I love it. Because the first book takes place in a matriarchal society, I needed a word that means warrior, but you would think of a female first and a male second, which warrior in the English language doesn't necessarily do that. And so I created an entire language filled with female conjugations of different words, and then used like 6 of them in the first book. And I loved it. And it was weird for a lot of people, but now I have friends and family that use those words in day-to-day conversation, and that's surreal and wonderful. So again, the support's been amazing.
Mm-hmm. So when you started writing the books, what was your motivation? Like, were you like, I want to be a published author? Has that been your lifelong dream, or what was your career path prior to being an author?
Originally, I was just writing for me. I just wanted to write for me just to see if I could. And I never really wanted to be a published author, but then once you create something, you want people to see it, you want the world to know about it. And so I originally worked with a little indie publisher, and it was the worst experience of my entire life. I never wanted to write again. I stopped writing for a long time. I never wanted to publish anything. It was terrible, but then I started self-publishing in March this year. And being allowed to just create and be excited and give something interesting to the world has been such an amazing and empowering process that now I just want to write forever.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about the marketing of yours, because you have a costume, you have armor, you've really taken the story and made it into something real as well. And we were just talking about the Renaissance Fair and how you go there. So how did you decide to blend those two?
I think a lot of it is, again, by the time I was 14, I was so over the idea that female armor had to be revealing and that we don't actually have vital organs that need to be covered. But a lot of it is just that marketing is such a terrible beast for so many authors. There's amazing authors here in Billings, and so few of them are known. Like, most of the time, you can't see an author just by walking by them in the street. So I started wearing armor to all of my events. I wear armor to the Renaissance Festival, obviously, every year. And it's a conversation starter, if nothing else. Even if people aren't ready to talk about a book, they're ready to talk about something cool and different and neat. And so now I wear armor everywhere. And it's a conversation starter, and even if they don't read my books, they're going to remember they saw me. Mm-hmm. And that's a huge part of marketing, is just standing out in the crowd. Like, there's 2,000 books published every week on Amazon. Standing out in that sea is almost impossible. So you might as well have as much fun as you possibly can while doing it. And I love wearing armor. It's like my favorite thing to do. So I look for excuses.
So did you design it yourself, or how did you, who helped you get the armor?
I did design it. I talked to somebody on Etsy, and they created it for me. I don't do very well with leatherworking yet. I'm working on it. Want to be able to create my own stuff. But somebody on Etsy made it. It came out of Australia. They did a fantastic job. Now I work with local leather workers so that I can shop local and support local. And it's just great. It's such an interesting thing to learn about, and I love doing it. But just the idea of creating functional armor that actually covers everything, it's so hard to find, especially for women in a lot of places. So we're working on making that a little bit more normal. Mm-hmm. We want to normalize the idea that women can also be amazing without being revealing.
Right.
If they want to be revealing, go for that too.
Mm-hmm. That is awesome. Okay, so when you're at the Renaissance Fair, I'm guessing lots of young women come up to you, and have they read the books? Do they know you through that, or do they know you through the Renaissance Fair and then they go read the books? What's that process?
It's a little bit of both. Like, I go to so many different events in armor, and so I'll have people come up and be like, "Hey, I've seen you before. I never talked to you before, but I've seen you, and I'm finally talking to you this time." I'm like, "That's amazing." I have some people that find my books online, and then they come looking for me at events, and that's really interesting. The Renaissance Festival was the first place I ever brought my books, and so now I have people that come back every year and ask, like, because I usually put out at least a short story every year, and so they come looking for new material. And this year I was going to have my new book, Faoii that just came out, but with COVID, the Renaissance Festival this year was canceled, so I'm going to have lots of new stuff next year, and I'm really excited about that. Mm-hmm. But I don't know, people come out of different wakes of life, and it's really the armor and the books that brings them all to one location and being like, "Hey, it's nice to see you again. I remember you from last time." Mm-hmm. And it's always kind of cool to be stopped at an event being like, "I recognize you."
Mm-hmm. Do you go outside of our market and promote your books as well? Have you traveled around the country previously, before COVID-19 hit?
The furthest I've gone is I did go to the Indie Audiobook Awards last year, and that was in Kansas City. I still can't believe I got to go to that, just because it was my first book ever. It was definitely my first audiobook ever. And for it to be nominated for the Indie Audiobook Awards for fantasy last year was so just amazing. I got to meet so many amazing voice actors and authors, and it was such a cool event. And so I have a pretty good following in Kansas City now. That's cool. And I didn't have that. I also have a really big following in California, but I'm not sure where they came from.
It's time to travel to California.
Right, you got to go to California now.
As soon as you can travel again, right?
Right, exactly.
So let's talk about the entrepreneur side of you, because you're an author, obviously, and that's your passion. But anytime you have a passion like that, you have to almost turn it into a business too. So what have you had to do did you have to get some help? Did you have to get some expertise, or did it come naturally for you to just be out marketing and doing, putting yourself out there with the books?
It's definitely not natural to me to go and market myself and to have interviews and to sit in front of people. Like, most authors are very introverted. We like to live in the worlds we created in front of our computers or wherever we write, and that's our bubble. So stepping out of that, especially for a lot of authors, is it's difficult, but once we do it, it's really, really amazing. I had no idea how to do it by myself. I hired a publicist here in town. He's been helping me make connections I wouldn't have had before. The Renaissance Festival was really the only thing I knew how to do by myself, because that's my group, that's my people. Those are my people that I love hanging out with. But beyond that, I'd never done anything like this before. I have, for a very long time, worked on female empowerment. I do a lot of presentations about empowering women, and this is why we're amazing. This is why we live in one of the greatest times in the world for women. Let's stand up and be awesome. I do that often, but it had never related to books before, and that was a very separate personality. Mm-hmm. Now they're kind of combining as I empower myself and empower others, and they empower me.
Mm-hmm. So when you were ready to publish your book, you said you kind of had a bad experience to start, and then you went on and do self-publishing through Amazon, is
Yes.
that right? Tell me about that process. And you said you were a little bit discouraged after that first round, and how did you then get it back together and go through and do the self-publishing with Amazon? Because I understand that's kind of a process in itself too.
And it is. I'm learning as I go. Originally, I published through a tiny indie publisher that was crowdfund based, and so I had to get 250 pre-orders before they'd even talk about publishing my book. And so that trying to sell a book is difficult. Trying to sell the idea of a book is even more difficult. But I did it. I had such an amazing hardcore group of fans already that we'll get this book published with you. It was like a Kickstarter, but just for publishing. And they rallied behind me. I had a Faoii army from the beginning. We made this book happen. And the publisher did publish it. It was nice, but it was 100% still me on everything. All they did was publish it, but I was giving them a portion of my royalties. Actually, all of my royalties, because they never did pay me any of them, ever. And that was the biggest thing. If I'm going to, we don't do this for the royalties, but the royalties would be nice to get. So when my contract ended after 2 years, I pulled out, and I didn't want to write again. It was such a bad experience. I had been working so hard just trying to get to be known for years, and had made very little strides in that regard. I was in debt from just trying to promote but never receiving royalties. I was just discouraged. I didn't even want to try again. But eventually I did, and I decided to self-publish. I'm like, if I'm going to be in charge of everything, I'll be in charge of everything from the ground up. And the amount of creative control in that has been so freeing. It's been so wonderful. So I will self-publish for the rest of my life, and I'm happy with that. I need more control than some authors do. Some authors are happy to write and then give it over to somebody else, and that's great. If you are good with that, go through a traditional publisher or a hybrid publisher. That's fine. It just wasn't for me.
Mm-hmm. I heard you say that, and I've read this statistic, 2,000 books are published a week on Amazon.
It's such an inundated market. There's so many books out there.
I know, because now that with self-publishing, it's a little bit easier. And so how did you, originally, when you first self-published, how did you make yourself stand out, with the Amazon crowd?
By the time I self-published, I already had a pretty solid fan base that came just from me giving or selling books for the last couple of years. I had published through this indie publisher for 2 years before I self-published. So I had a pretty awesome fan base already that were ready to share my things. And anytime I put out a new short story or did an anthology or did an interview or a podcast, they were ready to share. And that was a huge thing. So much of the problem with Amazon right now is that you're just one drop in a little ocean of other books. It's so hard to be seen. But I'd already built an island that I could stand on. Mm-hmm. And that was a big part of it. Starting with your friends and family and having people around you that truly believe in what you're doing is the key to any entrepreneurship. And it's just more so with books.
So I love this idea that you've built this network previous to actually doing the publishing. Has your family always been supportive, and your friends and everybody? Is everybody like, this is a great idea, you need to do this for a living?
My father is in both of my acknowledgement sections in both books, because there is no way I would have ever been the person I am now without him. He started off by raising a warrior rather than a damsel. And he always read to me as a child. And now, even now, if I come up with a new idea, he's the one I call at 2 a.m. Like, I have a husband who's super supportive, but I still call my father and I'm like, hey, this is my new idea for a new book. What do you think? And he'll talk to me about it and he'll bounce ideas with me. And he's always my first editor. Every time I finish a draft, I send it to him first and he looks at it and he gives true and honest feedback and sends it back. And my husband's also incredibly supportive and is a wonderful editor. But because my father has read everything I've ever written since I was old enough to write and kept it all in a yellow folder in his house, it's going to always be part of the process, I think, is to have that one person that planted the seed that I want to read and I want to write. And the fact that he's been there through all of it as it's bloomed has just been wonderful.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like a great father.
He's great.
Amazing. So you've written 2 books. Is there more?
This particular series is going to be a trilogy. I'm working on the last book, Faoii Ascended, right now, and they all are very different. They each have entirely different plots that are based kind of in modern society, but then put onto a fantasy setting. And so now, with all of the different issues that we're having all around the country, there's so much fuel for the 3rd book, and I'm enjoying writing it, but it's also so important to help people's voices get heard. Like, I started writing because I wanted to have more representation for women in fantasy. And the second book in the series, I really wanted to help give a voice to the next generation that are, for the first time as far as I know, in history, being forced to stand up and shout for their own futures all across the country. Like, we have so many teenagers and really, really young people standing up and advocating for their futures, and I think that that's important. So there's always going to be warriors if you look for them. And there's all sorts of different warriors in the world right now, and we see them all across the country, and a lot of their voices are still being drowned out, and I think that they need more representation as well, and that's really been feeding into the newest book. So I'm excited to share that, hopefully by the next year.
Next year, okay. So any opportunity for it would you love to see it be a movie?
I think every author would love to see their books become a movie. I would love that. It's such an impossible dream. Like, I don't fantasize about it very often. I really like to focus on goals that I know I can hit, because otherwise it's so easy to get discouraged. But everybody has that dream of, I would love to see this be a movie someday.
Yeah, I heard you do other writings too, short stories, anthologies. Tell me about that. Is that a different storyline, or is it taking these books and putting them into that different format?
It kind of depends on which anthology I'm writing for. I've written several short stories for Writing Block, which is a small indie publisher as well. And a couple of them have been within the Faoii Chronicles. They are standalones. You don't have to read either book to enjoy the short stories. But I've also tried my hand at science fiction for the first time. I wrote a really interesting science fiction story about a woman that was stopping a sex trafficking ring on Mars. That was interesting.
Yeah.
I'd never done anything like that before. And now I'm trying my hand at horror. I've never written anything like that before, but short stories give me the opportunity to try new things without committing myself to a 100,000-word book.
Is that what an average novel is, 100,000 words?
This one is 110,000 words. This one is 125,000 words. And both are a little bit long for a debut novel. You're supposed to keep them under about 100,000 words for a debut, they say, but I'm self-publishing. They can't stop me.
Well, and I was going to say, once the story starts to come, it just comes in whatever length it is,
exactly.
right?
And because it's such a different world than anything we've seen before, and because I did have to create my own language, I think that it needs a little bit more words, just worth of world building around it. So they are a little bit longer, but so far nobody's complained.
So when you're writing those books, are you thinking about your audience, or are you just really writing from the creative side of you?
I think during a first draft, it's just whatever I think of when I think of it. My first drafts they're just a mess. They're just like paragraphs of scenes as I come up with them, and they have nothing to do with like an actual plot or storyline. But especially since I draw so heavily on what's happening in the real world, I think it's impossible not to keep my audience in mind, because it's their stories too. I'm not the one that's making huge changes and huge ripples in the world right now. That is thousands of people all across the country who are doing amazing things. And of course I'm drawing on them for inspiration. So I don't think it's possible to write them without thinking of the people that will read it, because they're the ones that are helping me write it, even if they don't know about it.
I love that they're, your audience is helping you write it. I also heard you have a podcast. Do you have a regular podcast that people can subscribe to, or how would people find out more about your books, but also the other things that you're working on?
I don't have my own podcast. I do work on a lot of other people's podcasts. They call me up and like, hey, would you like to talk about this? And I'm like, of course I would, definitely. But I do post all of my podcasts on my website. It's tahaninelson.com. And I update it pretty regularly. Anytime I do something new and exciting, it ends up on there. And it also is where you can find all of my books and information about me and anything coming up. Or if, like, one of my author friends does something really exciting, I post it up there too, because we're all in this together. So.
Well, I've heard you talk about, it sounds like you've had some awesome mentors along your path. Are you now paying that forward, if you will, to other young authors, young women? How's that played out for you?
I still don't really consider myself a big author or a successful author, because there's so many people that have done more than me. But the number of emails I get every week from new authors or people that are trying to become authors, just asking for advice or just being like, hey, I admire you, I want to do what you've been doing, it's mind-boggling. And so I always try to give them the best advice I can. I try to be like, well, this is what's worked for me, and send me something you have, and if I like it, I'll share it with all my readers, so, because everybody wants to read more. So it's I always try to pay it forward, and it's been amazing at how much help I've gotten. So for every person that helped me, I'm definitely going to try to help 10 more people, because it's so discouraging if you don't have an army behind you, and I have one, but a lot of people don't.
So what is you'll finish the trilogy, and then will you end that series and maybe start something new, or do you feel like you'll come back and maybe do another 2 or 3 books off of that story?
I don't even know. Like, I love this world that I've created. I want to explore more aspects of it. We've only been on one continent, and there's several other continents out there that I haven't even explored yet. I want to see more of it, but I also am not the type of person to plan that far ahead with my books, because it really depends on what inspiration strikes me at what time. So I'm really inspired to finish the trilogy, and I'll do that, and then we'll see what happens after that. I'd love to try new genres. I'd love to try different worlds that are not in the Faoii Chronicles. There's so much, like, the possibilities are endless, so I don't want to tell everyone I'm going to do this next, because I don't know yet.
So do you write full-time? I mean, are you a full-time author, or are you still living in both worlds?
I'm living in several worlds. I have several jobs,
Yep.
and then I write usually between 2 and 4 a.m. because that's when I'm the most creative, and that's when I have extra time. And I don't know if I'll ever be able to just write, but at the same time, even if I do have the opportunity to just write, I'm not sure I want to. I get so much inspiration from other people, and I get so many stories from the people that I interact with at my other jobs, that I want to keep doing that. I want to keep being part of the community and not just getting stuck in the bubbles that I write in. So I think I'll always work other jobs as well, even if I don't need to, just because that's where people are. And it's nice to break up what I do during the day.
Yeah, it sounds like you get inspiration from other people too.
I get inspiration from everything, but yeah, people are the biggest part, because everybody's got such a cool, intricate story, and you have no idea until you talk to them, and you don't talk to them if you stay in your house. So,
So let's tell people again where they can find your information. And you've got the 2 books, and then you've got some other products and cool things on your website. I mean, I was looking through it. It's like you had really awesome. I noticed you brought your bag in, and so there's a lot of promotional products to go along with your books.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I'll hold these up again as well. But all my books are on tahaninelson.com, TAHANI Nelson.com, and it's got all of my books. It has all my short stories. It has links to anything else. I have 2 or 3 podcasts up right now, and a couple of videos. I also constantly post about things, if you are a writer and want to be a writer, on tricks I've learned or suggestions I have. on how to format or how to create covers or how to market, things like that. Like, I try to pay everything forward. So if you go to tahanynelson.com, hopefully you'll find something there that will interest you or at least help you in your own journey.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. It's just been wonderful to learn about you and your books, and love finding successful entrepreneur authors in our community, and I just really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
You bet. Thank you, and that's been another episode of Building Remarkable with Big Sky Economic Development. Have a great day.